Alright, so today we're going to go over what a lot of these buttons do. And just as a heads up beforehand, any of the stuff that you would typically use in programming, I'll tell you you'd use it in programming. And most of the stuff that I had to find it myself, and I'll tell you kind of what it sort of does, not what each individual function does, because that's the purpose of the other videos, talking about what each function does. This is kind of just where to find them generally. So, you have, each button has a function. This second button accesses the second function of each button. So mode gives you to like the settings, and you can mess around with those. I would encourage you to do so. You learn what each of the things does and get familiar with it. Quit will, so if you go to mode and you hit second mode, it'll quit out of that mode, out of that settings menu. If you're in a list or a function or a graph or a matrix, you can just hit second quit, or even a program. Second quit, or second mode, it'll quit out of that and it'll bring you back to the home page. Delete deletes certain attributes from a line. So if you want to get rid of this x or this negative right here, you can go to it and then just hit delete, and it'll delete that, and it'll leave you with the x minus 1 to the power of 2 plus 3. Your insert, which is the INS, allows you to insert things that were not there before. So what that means is if you wanted to add this, add a negative 2, right? Typically you'd have to go to the parentheses and then write 2, and then rewrite the x as a parenthesis, and then rewrite all of the line. But instead you can actually do second insert, which turns the cursor into an underscore, a blinking underscore, and you can add in more input that you didn't have there before. Huge time saver once I learned that. Alright, you have your alpha, which accesses the tertiary use, the third use, which is all the green. So you can get to solve and question mark and colon, all that stuff, all the letters. If you use second alpha, it's alpha lock, so it'll only use those until you turn it off. Otherwise, alpha A, or alpha math, would only give you A, and then it would go back to being a normal cursor. Whew, excuse me. So second link is if you have two calculators connected up to each other, you can send different variables or programs or pictures across that cable that you have connected up. Otherwise, you wouldn't really need the link. This button on its own, though, will reference the given variable for the function, right? So if you have y is equal to, and you hit this button, it'll give you an x. If you have a sequential or polar or anything like that, it'll use the proper variable for that. So it's a reference whatever variable you're using for that given function. If you use it on a regular, programming, it'll just give you the x. So you have your stat, which is a way to access statistics, and that'll allow you to access that's a way to access the lists. So if you go to edit, the first option, it'll give you the way to edit the lists. You can sort lists, you can clear lists, you can use linear regression, which is the second divider. If you go to the right, so you hit stat and then go to the right, it'll give you all the different linear regression equations. So if you have a data set here and you don't have the graph, you can make a graph out of the data set by hand if you really wanted to, or you can have the calculator do that just by running some of those equations, some of those functions. There's a trick specifically on how to do that with like straight lines and whatnot that I'll go through in detail later. The last one is tests. I've never used any of those, but there's a catalog I'll be talking about later that I'll show you how to use to find out exactly what those do. Cool. Next thing, math. So that's this button right here. You have different mathematical things that aren't on the actual graph here. So if you have your square root, which is here, your second x squared, you don't have a cube root, which is to the power of 3, or a cube, which is x to the power of 3, but you can access those by hitting math. You have your derivatives and your I part, your f part, your absolute value, your minimum, maximum, least common denominator, or actually least common multiple, your greatest common denominator. You have your way to access polar coordinates, angles, real numbers, complex numbers, random numbers, factorials. If you don't know what those are, that's fine. And then on the last page, you have a way to change fractions around from one to the other decimals to fractions. Is actually something else I'll look into, because there's a way you can do that just by using alpha, these f here. Anyway, test. So to the testing is if you're testing if something is true or not. Right. So if you have x is equal to 3, you can access the equal sign by going to second math. It'll give you your test, your equal, not equal, greater than, less than, etc. Logic is the next partition over. It's one to the right, and it's your and, or, not or, so on and so forth. And then your conditions, which is a more complex version of the logic and the test. Again, look through those yourself. Get familiar with those if you ever need them. You know where they are. All right, applications. Oh goodness, applications are amazing. If you're in chemistry or physics, applications, if you go to the very bottom, which you can just access the very bottom by going up. So it'll start you, when you open the apps, it'll start you at the very top of the list of all the applications that it has on the calculator. If you hit up, it'll take you to the very bottom, and that way you don't have to scroll through all of the applications by one. Anyway, SciTools, SciTools, is the one you'll most likely use a lot because it has significant figure calculator, unit converter, and vector calculator. And those are pretty intuitive. It takes a little bit of trial and error to kind of figure out exactly how they work. If there's enough demand, I might make a specific video on how to use those, but very helpful. And then just as a reference for those, they have these buttons, which reference to the little toenail-looking buttons on the bottom every time you access the apps. This one will give you your exit, and then sometimes you'll have some of the buttons in the middle, and then you'll have a button on the end typically talking about what exactly it's about, how to use it, whatnot. Actually, it doesn't tell you how to use it, but it'll give you some general information that isn't really helpful. Anyway, exit out of that, you go to angle, and that's the second function here. It'll talk about radians, degrees. I don't think I've ever used any of those things, but you can use them if you're trying to translate polar to rectangular. I think I forget exactly how I've used those, if I've ever used those, but very uncommon that I've used those. Program, which is right here. Very rarely have I ever used angle or draw, but program and applications are very, very loved, very well used. So if you go to program, you have your three options. You have at the top execute, E-X-E-C, you have edit, and you have new. Execute is if you want to run a specific program, you hit enter. It'll return you to the home screen with PRGM, just like this, and then it'll have the program name in all caps. Right? So if you had EXEC, for example, it would be PRGM, lowercase, EXEC, capital, and then you hit enter, and then it'll run the program. And if you don't want to run that program, you can just hit clear or delete. Actually, you have to go over it to delete it, but clear will also just clear the whole line. Next option is edit. If you want to edit a specific program, you can go to edit. You can click on the program you want to edit. It'll open up the program, and you can edit it. New allows you to create a new program. You can only use caps, but it'll automatically put you in A lock, so you don't have to hit alpha each letter. You can just type in the name of the program you want. I think you're allowed eight characters total, and I think you can only use letters. You can't use spaces or dashes. You might not even be able to use things like theta. Not entirely sure. I could test that, but it would take too much time. Second, quit. Next we have our vars, and vars are very helpful because they can reference specific variables. So if you want to have a program change your window size, your zoom, your background, reference certain statistical variables or table variables or different strings. Strings are talked about those earlier in the physics video, but strings are like a list of characters referencing either a name of something, or it can be of numbers, but the numbers aren't of numerical value, and that goes back to how the calculator understands different variables. Y-vars, you have your function variables, so your y1, your y2, etc. Parametric, which are different types of graphs. Polar, again, different kind of graph. On-off, meaning you can change the different on-off functions of different variables. Color, which I don't know how those are used, but again, we can talk about the catalog later. And before I'm out of time, you do alpha. Alpha, F1, F2, F3, F4, F5. Those are very helpful. You can turn you can access a lot of the stuff like in the math section and the math section here. You can access those by just clicking these really quick, and it's a lot faster because you don't have to hunt through the menus. But you can talk about log base, the square root of x. You can talk about factorial, you can create a matrix with a certain number of rows and columns, and then reference specific y variables like y1 to y9. And then if you're actually in a program, you can go program, edit. If you go alpha F5, you can execute the program, you can undo a clear, you can insert a line above the line that you're at, you can cut a line, you can copy a line, you can paste a line below, you can insert comments, and you can immediately quit the editor just off of those. So if you want to test your program, you don't have to go second quit and then find the program and then hit run. You can just do alpha graph, which is F5, and then hit enter, and you can immediately run the program to make sure it works. And those are, some of those options won't be present every single menu that you have, but still good to get familiar with those because it's a very quick shortcut way of doing things. And then I'll talk about the matrix, and yeah, actually, I just realized that a lot of those are almost done. These are the last two I'll have to talk about later, and the catalog and the answer, but should have time to talk about the matrix real quick. So, first off, we'll talk about matrix first. Okay, so matrix, if you have a matrix, which is a group of numbers. If you don't know what a matrix is, you probably don't need to know what they are, but you can access your different matrices by hitting the second X inverse, which accesses the matrix screen. First off, you have your names, which is the list of all the matrices you have, and then if you open one of them, it'll allow you to change the dimensions of the matrix in that screen. And then you have your math, which is your different mathematical arguments, mathematical commands that you can change you can use to talk about, to change, to edit different matrices. And then you can edit specific matrices using the last screen. So if you want just the names, you can reference a specific matrix by using the first page, which is the first divider. So if you have your three dividers, which is up here right at the top, if you click the second matrix, they're right here at the top. Okay. You can edit using the third one, and then reference them using the first. And you have your second function, which is your second up, which changes the brightness and makes it brighter. Second down makes it darker. I don't know what the green arrows do, but we might be able to find that in either the handbook, or look it up, or it might be in the catalog. That being said, I'll talk about the catalog, answer, entry, solve, memory, and memory is probably a whole video on its own. I'll talk about those in another video, as well as the stat plots and table and format and stuff like that. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe. You have comments that you can leave, questions about specific programs that I've made, that you've made, that you have questions about, recommendations for videos you want me to make, other questions on specifically this content, about where different functions are, how to use them, syntax, and that's it. Don't forget, most importantly, to show your work. Teachers will hang you up on, oh, I made a program. Okay, but did you show your work? So that's it from me. You guys have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one.